and gas stations. In 1932, Clyde was imprisoned, but his brother Buck helped organize a jailbreak. After this, Clyde and Bonnie began more active criminal activities, including bank robberies. Despite their successes, they rarely obtained significant sums of money. Many robberies ended in failure or minimal loot. In 1933, they committed one of their most famous operations, robbing a bank in Minnesota. However, their haul was only a few $100s. During this period, they also killed several policemen, increasing their pursuit by law enforcement. Bonnie and Clyde's popularity grew thanks to the media. Newspapers actively covered their crimes, creating the image of romantic outlaws. This myth was reinforced after their death in 1934, when they were shot by police in an ambush. The car they were driving was riddled with bullets. After their death, a real Bonnie and Clyde mania began. Their images were used in films, books, and songs. Especially popular was the 1967 film Bonnie and Clyde starring Faye Dunaway and Warren Beatty. It portrayed them as charismatic and attractive antiheroes, further solidifying their legend. In reality, their criminal activities were less significant than one might think. They robbed small establishments and rarely obtained large sums of money. Their murders and violence were often forced and accidental, not planned acts of cruelty. During their crimes, they were constantly on the run, living in dirty and uncomfortable conditions, often suffering from malnutrition and lack of medical care. Their life was far from the glamorous one depicted in films and books. Bonnie and Clyde are a classic example of how the media can create a myth far from reality. John Dillinger is another name that immediately brings to mind bank robberies and evading the police. His image as a folk hero was created by the media, but does he deserve it? John Dillinger was born in Indiana in 1903. In his youth, he committed several petty crimes and soon ended up in prison. It was there that he met people who would become his partners in future robberies. After being released from prison in 1933, Dillinger and his gang began a series of bank robberies. They used carefully thought-out plans and were able to evade arrest, making them legendary figures in the public eye. In a short period, they committed more than 20 successful bank robberies. One of their most famous heists was the robbery of a bank in Lima, Ohio, where they took the local sheriff and his deputies hostage. This robbery attracted national attention and made Dillinger famous. The media played a huge role in creating Dillinger's image as a hero. Newspapers wrote about his daring escapes and heists, making him famous across the country. In 1934, he was arrested and placed in the Crown Point Jail, considered one of the most secure prisons of the time. However, Dillinger managed to escape using a fake gun he crafted himself. This escape became legendary and cemented his reputation as an elusive criminal. Despite his successes, Dillinger was not as influential as one might think. His activities were limited to a few states, and his gang consisted of a small number of people. He was shot by the FBI in 1930 outside a theater in Chicago after being betrayed by one of his girlfriends. His death became a sensation, and thousands of people attended his funeral. However, his real influence on the criminal world was limited, and many of his heists were less successful than portrayed by the media. John Dillinger became a legend thanks to the media, but his real criminal activity was less significant than one might think. His story is a tale of how journalists can turn a criminal into a folk hero. When we hear the name Blackbeard, images of a fierce pirate terrorizing the seas come to mind. But how great was his real power and influence? Edward Teach, known as Blackbeard, was a pirate in the early 18th century. He began his career in the West Indies and quickly gained a reputation for his cruelty and intimidating appearance. His gang captured numerous ships, and his name struck fear into the hearts of sailors. Blackbeard was known for his eccentric intimidation methods. He braided his black beard into small pigtails and lit fuses woven into it to create clouds of smoke around his head. This made his appearance even more terrifying and instilled fear in his enemies. Blackbeard became famous thanks to his legends. Tales of his cruelty and wealth attracted the attention of writers and journalists. In literature and cinema, Blackbeard became a symbol of pirate ferocity and fearlessness. His image was romanticized in books, films, and even video games. In popular culture, he became a symbol of the golden age of piracy. In reality, Blackbeard operated for only about 2 years before being killed by the British Navy in 1718. His real successes were exaggerated, and many stories about his cruelty and wealth were fabricated. He was known for preferring intimidation and avoiding real battles whenever possible. Blackbeard operated on the east coast of America and in the Caribbean Sea. Despite his reputation, his real captures were relatively modest, and he often avoided direct confrontations, preferring to persuade his enemies to surrender without a fight. Blackbeard is an example of how myths and legends can make a criminal more significant than he was in reality. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid are a duo that became famous for their robberies in the Wild West. But how significant were their crimes? Butch Cassidy, whose real name was Robert Loro Parker, and the Sundance Kid, whose real name was Harry Longabaugh, began their criminal careers in the late 19th century. They robbed banks and trains, but their successes were not as significant as one might think. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid led the hole-in-the-wall gang, which engaged in robberies across several states. They became known for their carefully planned heists and ability to evade capture. One of their most famous crimes was the robbery of a bank in Wyoming, where they stole more than $30,000. However, many of their heists were less successful, and they often faced difficulties in executing their plans. Stories about Butch and Sundance became popular thanks to films and books, especially after the release of the 1969 film Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. They were portrayed as noble outlaws fighting against an unjust system. The film starring Paul Newman and Robert Redford turned them into national heroes and cemented their legend. In popular culture, they became symbols of freedom and resistance. In reality, their heists rarely brought significant sums of money, and their criminal activities were limited to a few states. They were forced to flee to South America, where they continued their crimes until their death in 1908. Their life in South America was full of hardships. They worked in mines and on farms, trying to hide from justice. Ultimately, they were shot by Bolivian soldiers after a failed bank robbery. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid became legends thanks to the media, but their real achievements were much more modest than their mythical reputation. Their story is a tale of how Hollywood films can turn ordinary criminals into heroes. Charles Pretty Boy Floyd. Charles Arthur Floyd, known as Pretty Boy Floyd, was known as the Robin Hood of the Great Depression. But how true is his legend? Charles Floyd was born in 1904 in Georgia. In the 1920s and 1930s, he began his criminal career robbing banks in the Midwest. He quickly gained a reputation thanks to his charismatic antics and ability to evade arrest. Floyd began his criminal activity with petty robberies and thefts. He quickly became known for his charisma and ability to persuade people. In 1931, he was arrested for a bank robbery, but he managed to escape from prison. The media created the image of Floyd as a hero who helped the poor by giving away money stolen from wealthy banks. This Robin Hood myth made him popular among the people. Stories about Floyd claimed that he gave money to poor farmers, helped those in need, and even left generous tips for waitresses. These tales made him a favorite among the people and a symbol of resistance. In reality, there is no evidence that Floyd gave money to the poor. His criminal activity was brutal and ruthless. He killed policemen and innocent people to avoid arrest. Floyd was shot by the FBI in 1934, after which his myth only grew. Floyd was known for his cruelty and ruthlessness. He often used violence to get what he wanted and was responsible for the deaths of innocent people. Despite this, he was romanticized as a hero. Charles Pretty Boy Floyd became a legend thanks to the media, but his real crimes were much more brutal and less noble than commonly believed. His story is an example of how the media can create a myth far from reality. These criminals became legends thanks to the media and popular culture, but their real crimes and influence are often exaggerated. We must remember that history and facts can be distorted, and it is important to separate myths from reality. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the worlds of myths and reality. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like, and share this video with your friends. See you in future episodes.